Well, welcome to Psychology to Live By. Today it's a Q&A with some very wonderful people. And our topic is, would you rather be right or happy? Our participants have watched the podcast of that name, which you can see or listen to at my website, drchris.life. But right now I'll do a quick summary before we go into our actual Q&A. Now, in examining this question, would you rather be right or happy, road rage can be quite illuminating. Indeed, road rage can make for very entertaining therapy, especially if the person has to drive to reach the counselling office. So what's going on with road rage, which can build from mild annoyance to really white-hot fury? What's making us so mad? And for those suffering from this affliction, the answer is obvious. It's caused by other bad drivers. But for those of us who are observing objectively, it's caused by the person's own mindset. So, as an example, take one of my counselling clients. It was over 30 minutes since he got mad with a bus driver on his way to see me, but he was still red hot angry. How had he maintained his rage? Well, the answer is by obsessively thinking about it over and over, by repeating the affront over and over, embellishing it with more and more justifications, energising it with images of what he was going to do to that mongrel when he caught him. And this is actually a pretty good model of how we continually justify to ourselves why we're right to be unhappy. We become, in fact, righteous. And sadly, it's been my frequent observation that human beings would rather be right than happy. It is sad, but I think true. So, once the event has passed, it's our mindset, our thinking and framing of reality that keeps us upset. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus put this most succinctly. Men are disturbed not by things, but by the view which they take of them. So what's to be done? Well, the first thing is to understand how we upset ourselves, and that we do this with two very, very common habits. So one is to focus on that which is upsetting and to amplify it in our mind. And the second is to make others responsible for our feelings. So a pivotal question to ask is, do we really want to hand the keys to our emotional life to the world or other people who may be ignorant or ethically deficient? And I think clearly the answer is no. And once we realise that most of the time we're upsetting ourselves, we actually have a real choice to stay upset or to shift attention to something more salutary. Once we realise we can be in charge of our own emotional economy, we can decide in favour of our own emotional bank balance. In the end, it all depends on whether you'd rather be right or happy. But while it's, really is that simple, alas, it's not so easy. But that one is a story for another day. All right, now to our Q&A with my good friends. And as always, I'm going to hand over to you guys. I'm always curious and interested to find out what insights you had and what questions you have having watched the video of this podcast. Who wants to jump in first?
I'll go first because I actually experienced road rage. This was a long, long time ago, but It was a case of I was turning left in an intersection that's big enough that the two cars turning left pull out.
Yeah.
And the car who was in front of me after the light changed didn't move. So I was stuck with traffic coming at me from both sides. Yeah. So I honked. That didn't go over well. This person followed me with his hand on the horn for about 6 or 7 city blocks till I pulled into a gas station. And he pulled up behind me and kept his hand on that horn.
Fantastic.
with everybody looking at me. And I'm thinking, what am I supposed to do?
Yeah.
So, being that, we don't have a lot of guns in this particular country, I got out and I tried to have a conversation with him.
Yeah.
Kept his window rolled up and kept his hand on the horn. So I got back in my car and I, drove like I was in the Indy 500 and lost him.
Yeah.
Went home and thought, that was bizarre.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it always brings me back to the point that most of the time when you get upset, it's your own perspective.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's really good just to step back and go, if you're upset over this, how stupid is that?
Exactly.
Because when you're upset, you're changing the chemical balance of your own body and you're effectively hurting yourself. Okay, so do I really want to hurt myself?
Exactly.
And that usually ends the being upset part.
Yes, that's exactly right, Terry. There's so many stepping off points from what you've had to say here, but one is, although we can look at an example like that, and obviously it's an extreme example, and we can say, oh, well, I'm not like that. But really, what you see in this is a model for the ways, perhaps in less dramatic ways, that every day we upset ourselves. We subject ourselves to, and identify with very upsetting thoughts. And so this is why I find this topic particularly interesting, in that it gives us a model that we can examine with great clarity, but then we realize, oh, that's also me. And the other thing is, probably not at the time, but subsequent to that experience of yours, there's room for compassion for a person like that. Not at the time, I said, Terry. In that you can just see how clearly they're trapped inside that consciousness. Mm-hmm. And it also should make us at times also cautious, because we can see how far from reality people can be removed.
It was quite a long time before I used my horn again.
Yeah. And you might remember, Terry, in the podcast, I tell the story of a guy who chased someone in a car, very similar, until they ran out of petrol.
Yeah.
Went for hundreds of kilometers. And as you say, good that there's not such a gun culture in Canada, because you would not have got out in your car.
I would have kept driving.
Yeah, yeah. And there have been recorded deaths of, that are related to road rage, where people have fought each other and so on.
Yeah.
Yeah. Fantastic. Who else?
Well, as someone who has a tendency to prove them wrong, I was curious, thinking about a lot of this is that impulsive reaction, where you just, well, wait a second, it's that impulsive reaction. So do you have any nuggets that you would offer to put into practice to help move away from being reactionary in the effort to prove them wrong?
Okay. Probably it's impossible initially to not have the immediate reaction, right? Because these things happen faster than conscious thought, right? But the real issue then is how long it takes for you to wake up. Mm-hmm. So like that man that Terry was talking about, it's like they're in a dream, and their mindset is actually taking them away from reality and stopping them, If they'd seen what a sweet and lovely guy Terry was, they wouldn't have been able to maintain their rage. So it's this, knowing this, you can kind of pre-warn yourself. When you get in the car, you might say, now, if someone misbehaves, I'm going to catch myself in this righteousness, in this thing about proving them wrong, and I'm going to wake up from this nightmare. I'm going to reappraise it, as quickly as I can. It's a bit like actually, sometimes people ask me, I never remember my dreams, but other people always talk about their dreams. And you can actually you can train yourself to remember your dreams by when you go to bed, by literally saying, now, I'm going to wake up as soon as my dream is finished. I'm going to, before it goes, I'm going to remember the dream, because there's a few seconds there where you can recapture the dream. Well, in a funny kind of way, the same applies in waking life, right? And we can keep reminding ourselves, wake up from the dream, right? And you're much more likely to. You recognize inside the dream, oh, I'm dreaming. Now you can get out. Does that help?
Yeah.
It does, definitely. Thank you, Doctor.
I have a related question. And so what's fascinating about all of this is that, like, how easy it is for us as individuals to hand off responsibility for our own emotional responses to, in some cases, absolute complete strangers that we might never actually meet.
Correct.
And, a follow along of that also is that, that dawned on me watching that podcast, is that, like, when we hold those grudges or hold that anger, the other person often there's no repercussions to the other person. Yeah. So all that we are doing is just carrying around this toxic energy that is only negatively affecting ourselves. It's not actually having there's no benefit to even balance out the negative that we're doing to ourselves. Is just all negative.
Yeah.
And so, I have 2 small children. Kids especially are very easily hijacked by their emotions. Mm. And what never, ever works as a parent is when I say, maybe you should just calm down. In fact, that never works with adults either. So as somebody who might be interacting, in my case with kids who are trying to navigate these emotional responses, are there tools or ways that I can help them pull themselves out of that emotional response and help them develop those coping skills over time?
Yeah, that's boy, every parent in the universe is going to be on the edge of their seat right now, right? What immediately occurred to me was, I used to watch my wife with our kids in utter amazement at how she would do this, right? Because I suspect I was very much like you, and i.e. not that effective. Yeah. No offense, Chris.
Yeah, correct. You're correct.
Yeah. But I'd watch my wife, and she would not get agitated at their agitation. Mm-hmm. And she would just generally distract them. She would give them a better alternative to being upset. Now, of course, it takes a little while for someone to get unupset, right? So, as you say, you can't just say to a person, be happy when they're inside anger, all right? Because if you think about it, that there's a whole hormonal, neural system, mm-hmm. blood flow, as well as all these thoughts. And so they actually have to change state very often before they can change their mindset. Like Terry's example of that man, you can only guess, I think we can make a pretty accurate guess about what was going on inside his body. Mm-hmm. The fight-flight system would have been roaring. His blood pressure would have been pretty high, et cetera, et cetera. There would have been a lot of stress hormones in his system. So with kids, we've got to, and with people generally, by the way, it's not just kids, we've got to hold them long enough for them to shift state. And the other thing that I used to see with my wife, Mary, was because her physiological state was one of sort of relaxation and calm, and I've got to say, a love for the kids that transcended their upset. They just naturally, over time, will resonate to their state, to Mary's state.
Mm-hmm.
And so without even saying anything, there's also this other thing. So she was doing two things simultaneously, being in this way, but also just redirecting their minds to something she knew they'd find really interesting.
Right.
And, one of the psychological tools that I often recommend to people around this is what I call the two conditions test, right? And the first part's not so applicable for a young child, but that is examine your thinking. Is your thinking realistic? And if it's not, you need to change it. But kids can't do that yet.
Right.
But the second thing is, is even if it's realistic, you're paying attention to it's just upsetting you, like you were saying, right? And so if there's no good is coming out of it, shift your attention to something more salutary, right? So in a sense, what my wife Mary was doing there was training our kids to shift attention.
Yeah.
Thousands of times, practicing it in, so the neuroplasticity, and that's what parenting is largely about. It's a very long haul activity where you're helping them connect their frontal lobes to the emotional centers of the brain through lots and lots of modeling and practice. Right. So there's no quick answer. As I say, it's a long haul.
So by the time they get to be teenagers, you might actually get there when they leave the house.
Yeah, well, probably it's a little bit longer than teenagers, actually, Terry.
Yeah, it sounds like it's the 20s.
So, well, I've got some memory that for young women, they get more of this wiring hooked up, in the sort of early to mid 20s, and young men usually the late 20s, early 30s.
Yeah. Chris, I also find that tickling works really well.
Yeah. Again, it changes their state.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Instantly. They don't know whether to cry, be upset, or to laugh their heads off.
Yeah. Exactly.
So you just keep tickling to the laughs take over. All
right, guys. Look, that as unsurprisingly, fantastic insights, questions, and I always enjoy these Q&As, and I look forward to when we can do this again. So be well, and we'll talk again soon.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye, guys.